Well, welcome everyone. I'm Steve Savant. We're broadcasting live from the heart of Phoenix, Arizona on KXXT Family Values Radio. And I want to also welcome our online audience on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And I want to give a big shout out to Beyond Fear to Freedom, one of the best Christ-centered fellowships that provide a safe and loving community for women in recovery. Just check out their website at beyondfeartofreedom.org. And if you want to write me, feel free to do it. Keep those theological questions away. I don't answer them. My email is steve@180uturn.com. That's Steve at 180youturn.com. And today on 180, I want to welcome Kevin Buchanan. Now, I think we've done 6, 7 shows, women only, right? So finally, the savant gets out of the estrogen zone. Oh my gosh. It was just like just one after another. And by the way, they were blockbusters. If you missed me, hop out to YouTube, check out all those. I mean, I don't think there was a weak story among them. It was just really great.
Absolutely.
Well, we're talking today with Kevin. And when we do our Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday show, it's usually generally for the before the Lord experiences and so forth. But this is really a strange show because Kevin was brought up with a great degree of the understanding of the Lord. His family was Christian. They were all there. And I just want to be able to walk through it today because this is going to be the first show that I can recall ever recording where I had a person that did serious time and I just don't buy that he was guilty. Now, I'm not a jury. I'm not an attorney. I have no idea. Only God knows the heart. Absolutely. But my gut tells me this could have been a travesty of justice. But other than that, we're going to talk to Kevin about it. Now, Kevin, you were brought up, and I used to play down there as a young man. I had to cut through East St. Louis one time. Not a good thing for me.
No.
Cutting through to try to get to Collinsville Park.
Oh, wow.
Wrong way.
Yeah, you should have done like they did in the Bible and went around somewhere.
I should have went around, right.
Yeah,
and whatever little bit of the Lord I had, I used the prayer life all the way through East St. Louis.
Absolutely.
East St. Louis, I'm from the south side of Chicago. East St. Louis is a rough neighborhood. I'm not going to kid you, it is.
Yeah.
But your neighborhood was a little different because men were involved.
Yes.
People of Christian faith and ex-military Vietnam vets were there.
Absolutely.
So it was different.
It was a lot different. First of all, let me clarify, it was not the east side of the city of St. Louis in the state of Missouri. It was a small city called East St. Louis, as you well know, in the state of Illinois. And so about 8 blocks, and what made our small area, even though it was dilapidated, and we thought the cats in Chicago, like in the Cabrini Greens, we thought they were rich because they had windows and electricity. I mean, that's just how we saw things. And my dad, he served, he did tours in Vietnam, and his buddies that he served with, when they moved when my dad moved back home to East St. Louis, they moved in with him. So our neighborhood was surrounded by men that actually raised their sons and their daughters, and they saw to the safety and the security of the neighborhood. So even though there were gang elements that were present, we had more security from godly men.
I have to say, this is one of the big pluses and advantages of having the men and head of households running the neighborhoods, and people really actually having a pretty good growing up experience.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Even with the gangs. Now, your dad was college educated too. It's not just a Vietnam veteran. He was educated. Your mom?
Yes, and my mother as well.
So college is in your blood.
It's in our blood. It was both my mother and father not only highlighted it, but they encouraged it, and it was almost an expectation that we would go to college post high school.
Now, when I think about growing up in a pretty good idea, you didn't have really, as many of our former guests have, you don't have childhood trauma?
No.
Dad's pretty good. You know the rules of engagement. You obey your dad's rules, do your chores, get your homework done. I mean, you're done.
Yes. Yeah, I grew up in a generation where children still got whoopings, and parents knew the difference between corporal punishment and abuse. And so there was an expectation that, if we did something in the neighborhood, we might get whooped by a mother down the block, another mother on the way home, our mother when we got home, and then by our father when he made it home. So, it really wasn't worth doing the things that normal kids did to get away, because there was no getting away with it.
Well, who needs camera when you have a neighborhood like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You do not need security cameras. Okay, so and again, I'm thankful for your dad's service in Vietnam. It's my generation, all my friends, baby boomers, if you did time in Vietnam or you did military service as a baby boomer, I salute you, and we thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.
Now, during this time, pretty good deal, but all of a sudden, your dad's and mom are going to pick up and move to Arizona in 1979. What's with that?
Well, my mother comes from a large family.
How large is large?
She has, don't quote me on this, but I like to say 20 kids, but lots and lots of sisters and one brother. And when my grandmother got sick, we came out here. She had cancer, and by the time we made it here in '79, my mother and my middle brother Mark and my grandmother was riddled with cancer. She was on her deathbed. And so when she passed, my mother called my dad and said, hey, you know, all my sisters are out here. We need to come out here so I can be the, you know, like what to do for them, what my grandmother did for all of them. And so that's why my dad packed up, and him and my oldest brother moved out here.
And then Grandma died shortly after you guys got here, right?
Yes.
Okay, so when this happened, I mean, how your mom? I knew your mom was close to her. Were you pretty close to your grandma?
Man,
real close.
Steve, absolutely. We come out here for the summers and spend summers with my grandma. Now, keep in mind, I'm only 7 at this point, but my whole life I knew her. She was a big presence in our life growing up. So
I have to say, some of the typical things in people's lives, and this is just me speaking out from being brought up in a kind of a rough neighborhood myself and a family. You know, grandmas are pretty big deal.
That's a big deal.
And generally, sometimes if you have your mom's not that great, sometimes grandma takes over.
Absolutely.
So I can say that for myself, and a lot of the people that have been on this show can say the similar thing. Now, when you got into Arizona, you just a new place, you got a new peeps, new neighborhood. What was that like?
Well, we actually moved into my grandma's house, and we stayed there, which was in South Phoenix, went to school there, and it was just a whole new thing. And the biggest difference for me was back home, as you know, based on your experience with East St. Louis, there weren't a lot of people of a different hue back home in East St. Louis. So we had no exposure to white Americans or Hispanic Americans, and so it was pretty much all black folks that we knew. And so the biggest difference for me, and I can maybe speak for my brothers, is that we got exposed to different cultures, different ways of life, and that really enriched us growing up because we just got that exposure that we wouldn't have gotten back home.
Now, was it different for you because we have a lot of Hispanic? I had to pick up Spanish when I got here.
Yeah.
You know, when I moved from Chicago back in 89, 88, whatever it was, I had to pick up some Spanish, which I did.
Absolutely. The school that we went to, it was predominantly Hispanic and black, and with an emphasis on Hispanic. So I learned Spanish here and there, learned how to speak it, but my dad taught us to learn this because he said there's no greater way to honor a people than to learn their language and their culture. And that way you can relate to them better. Instead of them making them become like you take on what they do, and then they'll let you in better.
I can't express that. You know, when I was in Europe, my German was choppy, but everybody was so appreciative.
Absolutely.
Listen, you know, I love your line here, Kevin. You said you were a drug baby. When I first read this, I didn't follow it up. You know, I didn't read the second line, but it says you were a drug baby. But when you mean you were a drug baby, what do you mean?
I mean, drug baby, we were drugged to church every Sunday without choice.
Without choice.
Without choice was not an option.
A lot of compelling going on.
A lot of compelling going on. We were urged by our parents to go to church.
Now, I have to say, in comparison today in the 21st century, you know, most services of any decent-sized church is going to be in and out, an hour of power and you're done, right? But when we're talking about the African-American, Sunday is a complete full-day event. Talk a little bit about that.
Look, we're up before the rooster. The rooster's looking at us like, what are you doing up? Wake me up in an hour. And so we get dressed. I had to, of course, I'm sure you remember, had the clip-on ties and the little jacket with the vest and, you know, the church, the Sunday go-to-meeting gear.
Oh, yeah.
And we get to church, man, and church was like you said, an all-day event. It was like a job. So we'd get there, there'd be prayer, and then we'd sit with the adults, and then we'd get separated from the adults, and then we had the kids' church and the Sunday school, and my mom was my Sunday school teacher, so I wasn't getting away with anything at home or church. Now,
when were you picking up stuff in those meetings? You know, hey, I mean, they're doing Bible.
Listen, I was my mom's helper. I probably had what they would consider today hyperactive disorder. I had all this energy. I mean, I don't know if you can tell now because I'm a big guy, but I had all this energy as a child, and so my mom had me, just like my teachers, she would have me doing stuff. So I was her helper with the Bible lessons, and we put on Bible plays and everything. So yeah, I picked it up.
Yeah, and just for you, when you do watch this on YouTube, I mean, you're 6'3", 270 something, right?
6'3", 282.
282. Okay. Hey, listen.
For now.
And I'd be pretty brave to go to ASU and start preaching if I had Kevin with me. So, Kevin, now when you're talking about, you learned the Word of God, your mom was your school teacher. When you go Sunday, it's an all-day event, as you said, and they have potluck.
Absolutely.
Some of the best food in the world.
Listen, in the world. And I've been to other places in the world, so I can testify to that. So Sunday was a job. It was difficult. You started out slow because you were sleepy, but they gave us snacks and they gave us food. And yes, it was a potluck setting every Sunday.
When we go through this story of Kevin throughout this whole week, you're going to say, how can we go from everything that Kevin's describing to 20 years down in prison for something that he didn't do, and how God can take anybody, even in the innocence of it? Because, a lot of times we talk about the tree of knowledge and having guilt, but we forget our original innocence.
Absolutely.
And there's something to be talked about that. When we come back from the break, we're going to continue this saga of Kevin's story, I think highly unique among all the people I've ever interviewed. When we come back from the break, we'll continue.
Thank you.
How's that?
It was good. You make it real easy. I appreciate it. Is my hat straight?
It's fine.
This is who I work with. Gold Canyon Heart and Home, nonprofit. Yeah, just a shameless plug.
Every Friday night, like-minded women gather together to share a meal and their stories how they broke the destructive cycles in their lives by the power of God and moved on to a new life in Christ.
Funny story. The church I worked at, when I came home, I used to set up as the janitor for BFF on Friday nights. I'd set up for their gathering. Yeah.
Love Debbie.
Yeah, love her.
For 15 years.
You can't help but love Debbie.
BFF's website at beyondfeartofreedom.org. And don't forget to listen to BFF's weekly video podcast with Debbie, Dean, and Sharon, their own life experiences and their biblical influence will overhaul your thinking, your identity, and your future. They'll keep you encouraged with some great insight and biblical truth.
I recognize. Oh, sorry.
At beyondfeartofreedom.org. BFF, where you might just discover a best friend.
Well, welcome back. We're talking to Kevin Buchanan and about his story, and actually that first half is pretty cool. You're brought up in a Christian home. You got people that care for you. Your neighborhood's their own watchdog. Who needs a cop when you got all these people checking you out? And on top of that, you're eating some of the finest food that ever was on a Sunday. I mean, potluck is on a church, I've always said, barbecue, potato salad. I mean, all those things I'm all into. But when we talk about, this is a hard part of this front end of the story, because you expect your parents to stay together. I did.
Yeah.
I didn't expect nobody leaving.
Yeah.
And when I first came, when I started coming to school, once I got out of St. Vincent's Catholic Orphanage, I never heard anybody's daddy who did time. I was the only one.
Yeah.
I never heard anybody's dad and mom divorcing.
Right.
How was that for you?
Well, my identity was in my family. It wasn't in church. Church was what we did on one day of the week, but the biggest part of my identity was my mom and my dad and my brothers. And in the African American community, having your birth mom and your birth dad in the same home married, at the time that was in my area, and from my understanding, it was rare. And so, especially when I got here to Arizona, it was on the West Coast, it was super rare. And so when they broke up, I broke. My identity was fractured.
Give me an insight on what's it like to have a father in the house who was very, very engaged in the family, running the show. You wouldn't let you pal with people, certain people, kept your nose clean because he'd find out anyways.
Yeah.
But then he takes off and all the governors, all the guardrails are off.
Yeah, it was difficult. So like you said, my dad, he was very present. That was the best gift he gave us growing up, was his presence. And when he was gone, when he was no longer in the home, the choices that I made for friends and the choices I made to go hang out and things that I would do without him there were things that I would never have done if he had been there. I don't blame him, but I do recognize, close to 40 years later, no, close to 35 years later, I recognize that it was a very traumatic time. So though there was no trauma in my childhood, at the age of 16, my parents broke up, and it just broke me.
Kevin, isn't it true that dads have radar on them that could pick these guys off, guys that you shouldn't be hanging with? I mean, you can't see it, but my gosh, your dad saw it.
Absolutely. Well, he had more life experience than me. He had been to more places than me, and he knew how to, like you said, with his finely tuned radar, he knew how to pick up and detect things that I just couldn't.
Now, during this time, you kind of came to your own self-awareness. I don't know what age people, hey, I'm a human, I'm an individual, I got a free choice. Oh, there's a God out there. Yeah. I mean, you were about 10 years old when you, I think what my word would be, you became self-aware.
Yeah, all the stories that we learned in Sunday school and all of the things that my mom and dad would say to us, like, for example, my mother, she'd always say, your dad's driving to work with Jesus. He's coming home with Jesus. Let's pray that they're safe. And he's safe because he's with Jesus. So I took that literally. I was like, okay, I'd be waiting. My dad come in with his briefcase. I'd be like, where's Jesus at? Mom said you were with Jesus. And so at the age of 10, I literally, and self-awareness, it was an awareness that came on me from the Lord. He just opened my eyes and he let me know that I was separated from him. Even though I was in a godly home and I was exposed to the Bible, he and I still had business to conduct.
Now, this is to me, this is a pretty. This is the value of being brought up in a home that values the Bible, values the Lord, having Him at the center of the household, and you all of a sudden, when you're a young man, you feel a separation from God because you haven't done your duty yet. You haven't come to Him yet and made your peace.
Yes, exactly. So, a lot of kids that I know of, even today, but especially back then, they relied on their parents' faith, and so that's like, it just doesn't work that way, not in eternity. And so what happened was the Lord opened my eyes and showed me that I was separated from him, not because of what my parents did or what I did, but something that happened a long time ago. So I realized I owed him a debt I couldn't pay, and Jesus paid a debt he didn't know. And so I transacted business with the Lord at the age of 10, and I just cried out to him and I said, save me, not from my actions, but save me from my nature, the direction I'm naturally headed without you. And he did. He saved me, and he came into my life, and it was really returning stolen property, I like to say. I returned stolen property to God. I was in a slave market of sin, and the biggest bidder at that point was Satan. And then Jesus came along, and they said, sold to the man with the holes in his hand.
I love that. And God is totally into fixing anybody. If I've learned anything from 16 years in prison, I mean, there's nobody off the table for God.
No.
Now, at 16, you started actually being part of the Sunday school, the whole routine, because you wanted to be part of the good side.
From 10 to 16. Actually is how it went. So when I got saved, I mean, I was always participating in church, but those 6 years between 10 and 16 is when I became actively involved and consciously involved and intentionally involved in church activity, outreach, and community groups.
With your own decision.
With my own decision,
your own free will.
I wanted to go to church.
Wanted to go to church. Wow. See, I love that. That changed from the drug, you said in the first segment. Now you're wanting to go and actively pursuing it. When your dad took off, you have guys coming in your neighborhood. You're trying to stay true to the Lord, but you're also got the competition of these kids in your neighborhood that aren't all that great to hang with.
Absolutely. So for me, it was. I recognize now, after so many years in prison, and since I've been out, some counseling, I can look back on it and I see what happened was the choices I made were as a direct result of the pain I was experiencing, and so. What I did with these cats, they really weren't my friends, they weren't my homies, and they weren't necessarily bad people. It's just that we weren't going in the same direction. The Bible says light and dark can't have any fellowship. It can't think the same. So instead of them thinking like I did in the light, I began to think like I used to in the dark. And so that's why I was drawn to them, because that was like the ibuprofen and the psych med for what I was feeling. And that's how I masked it, was hanging out and doing these things that I knew better.
Nobody goes from their place of, knowing the Lord and just saying, I quit. Generally, it's a small negotiation over a period of time. Would you say that was true for you?
Absolutely. The word insidious, I'm reminded of the word insidious. Slow, gradual, but harmful.
It's like, people have heard this before, it's like the frog that you put him in the water and you start to turn up the heat and he doesn't notice that the water is boiling and he dies never knowing what hit him.
Absolutely.
Okay, now when we're talking about it, because we're setting this up for everything that we're going to be talking about for the next couple days, you start this negotiation, we know we shouldn't be smoking weed, but we start smoking weed.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, I remember when I first got introduced to weed, I thought it was tobacco. So I thought I was smoking a cigarette. And I was like, hey, this doesn't taste like or smell like what you guys are, you're smoking Newports. Why doesn't this? They're like, oh, they called it Mary Jane back then. Oh, that's Mary Jane. And immediately while I'm talking to them, I feel this like a cloud, like this euphoric feeling in my frontal lobe, and I'm just like, oh, this feels really good. This is cool, and everybody else is smoking it, and I just got sucked into it. So weed for me became sort of a rebellion, but also something that made me feel better. Plus, side benefit, you get the munchies, and I love to eat, so it was a good fit for me.
Well, and also you're drinking. You
Yeah,
learn how to drink hard liquor.
40 ounces was pretty big back then.
I mean, it's, when I first started doing Crown Royal at 12 and 13, it didn't taste that great to me.
Yeah.
I have to say.
Yeah,
right?
I get
but
it.
I got my taste buds became accustomed.
Yeah,
right?
I could dig it.
Now, but it didn't stop there.
No.
Now, it's one thing is doing dope. It's another thing to drink. You think, well, those are all adolescent issues, although they're dangerous front end door openers.
Door openers.
But then we started getting, the Bible talks about us keeping ourselves straight. We shouldn't be hanging with loose women, I don't want to drink, smoke, or chew, or run with girls who do,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Talk about a little about that.
Well, what happened was, and by no means am I blaming anybody, because I was fully conscious. I knew what I was doing. I'm accountable for the Lord, and that was part of what drove me deeper into it. The conviction. So I'm drinking, I'm smoking weed, I'm hanging out with cats, I'm going to house parties, I'm doing things that I know I shouldn't be doing, I'm involved with people I shouldn't be with, and then that life comes with sex. Sex is a big part of that lifestyle, and so I'm meeting these women or girls, well actually a couple of them were women, they were grown. I'm meeting these females that for some reason they wanted to sleep with me, because I've never really considered myself this ultra attractive cat, but they slept with me, I slept with them, and so that just changed into a habitual lifestyle that just led me into just a pit. So yeah, there was no light down where I was at.
I love that. The spirit. The Bible says the spirit of adultery, right?
Yeah.
Right. Is targets people.
Yeah. Sexual sin, according to the Bible, is the only sin that you commit against yourself, because it's against your body. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, not to get into theological, because I don't like it, but sometimes
it.
I like to separate out, hey, these are the sins outside the body, 1 Corinthians 6 says, and these are the ones that are inside. And it's an affront to your own temple. Absolutely. So I'm not going to fight that, because that's the truth of the Lord. Now, this phrase is pretty dangerous phrase when we talk about it. You actively start to recognize that, hey, you might be being sifted like wheat.
Yeah.
You're going through this sifting process. Hey, I might be getting the short end of this stick here.
Yeah, yeah, because of my own choices. So I even though I can theologically explain it now and biblically point to it today, back then all I recognized is that there were forces that were like moving me around, sometimes against my own will. And so that I recognized was the devil, like what Jesus told Peter, Satan has sought permission to sift you like wheat. The only person he can get permission to sift a child of God from is God. And so I recognized that I was outside of God's perfect will because of my choices, and then I became subject to his permissive will, which allowed Satan to come in and touch me in areas that he otherwise wouldn't have been able to touch me in.
Don't you think, and I'm not even trying to get doctrinal here, it's just a thought, don't you think people try to figure out how big and wide the permissive will of God is to see how deep they can play in grace?
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%.
I mean, I have to say, I looked at Romans 2 about 3 weeks ago. I was in Romans 2. It talks about how, have you thought the mercy and the kindness of God? Have you felt that was a shortcoming? Yeah, I think people do that all the time.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, we're going to have to come back to this tomorrow for our tomorrow's show. Don't forget to check out BFF's Friday night meeting at 5:30 to 6:15. Food and fellowship. Child care is provided, and they also have meetings for the guys on one side, the gals on the other. So if you got a spouse involved, they cover both sides of that gender issue. And for more information, just go to beyondfeartofreedom.org. I'm Steve Savant. Remember, no one's outside the reach of God. No, not one.